7 weeks after the wedding, my daughter-in-law locked me out of my own greenhouse. Brooke slammed the ring of keys down onto my kitchen counter, slid a notarized paper across the tile toward me, and announced that the house Samuel and I had built with our own 2 hands now belonged to someone else. She pointed at the cardboard boxes she had already stacked against the living room window boxes she had assembled the night before while I was asleep in the room down the hall. She called the facility she had chosen for me clean, leaning on the word as if I were a stain she had just finished wiping away. She told me to pack whatever still mattered, and then she glanced at the trays of heirloom seedlings I had nursed for 11 years, and she laughed. I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of the counter, counting my own breaths so I would not break anything. Then I looked down at the signature at the bottom of the page. The strokes were smooth, even tidy. Beautiful. Too beautiful. Brooke did not know that this hand had trembled for 6 years. She did not know how I signed my name anymore, and she certainly did not know what I kept at the bottom of the cedar chest beneath Samuel's field journals. A thing I had not touched in 4 years, a thing that needed only one call to wake. The lawyer she had brought with her cleared his throat from the doorway, and I lifted my eyes to look at him properly for the first time. I was a lean man in a navy suit, mid-50s, with the kind of practiced blandness that told me he had done this before in other kitchens to other old women who had no idea what was happening to them. He set a leather folder on the table beside the notarized page and opened it with 2 fingers, as if the contents bored him. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "my name is Warren Pierce. I represent your son and his wife in this matter. I want you to understand that everyone would prefer this to be handled with dignity." "This matter," I repeated. "The transfer of the property." He turned a page. "The deed has been recorded. That part is finished. There is also a petition for emergency guardianship that was filed with the probate court earlier this week. The hearing is scheduled for 9 days from now. If you cooperate with the transition, if you accept the placement your family has arranged, the petition can be resolved quietly. If you resist, the court will be asked to make a formal finding regarding your capacity, and those findings become part of the public record." He said all of it in the tone a man uses to read a weather report. He did not know that I had spent 31 years reading data that other people found unreadable, that I had built a career on hearing the one wrong note in a long, clean measurement. He thought he was explaining the situation to me. He was handing me a map. "Where is my son?" I asked. Brooke answered before Pierce could. She had put her sunglasses back on indoors in my kitchen, and the lenses gave back 2 small, warped copies of my own face. "Daniel is busy," she said. "He asked me to handle this because he knew you would make it emotional. He didn't want to watch you cry." Behind her, the old house smelled of coffee and cut stems and the faint green damp that always drifted in from the greenhouse when the door was open. Samuel's photograph sat on the mantel in the next room, him in a blue work shirt with dirt on the collar, grinning at a camera I was holding on a spring morning that felt right then like it had belonged to a different woman. A half-repaired mantel clock lay open on the table where I had been cleaning its gears the night before, brass wheels catching the light. "You changed the locks on the greenhouse," I said. "Not the house, the greenhouse." Brooke tilted her head. "The buyers wanted it secured. There's expensive equipment in there, apparently. Grow lights, whatever it is you do." She said it the way you would talk about a hobby that had gone on too long, and she had no idea that the grow lights and the trays and the little labeled envelopes represented 4 decades of work that had once made a man in a boardroom go pale. She saw a shed full of dirt. I let her see that. I let all of them see exactly what they had come to see. "I need to sit down," I said, and I made my voice thin, and I lowered myself into the chair by the clock as if my knees had betrayed me. It was not entirely a performance. My knees had betrayed me for years. But I sat because sitting let me put my hand flat on the open folder, and it let me look at that signature one more time from up close. Ruth Eleanor Holloway. The loops were confident. The R was upright. Whoever had traced it had studied an old check because they had even reproduced the way the tail of the final letter used to trail. Used to. 6 years ago, before the arthritis came into the joints of my right hand and turned my handwriting into something apologetic and slow. I signed like that. Not anymore. For 6 years, every signature I have made carries a small stutter, a hesitation, a place where the pen has to be dragged instead of pushed. My bank knew it. My attorney knew it. My own hand knew it. Whoever forged this had copied a woman who no longer existed. "I'll need a few days," I said softly, "to decide what matters." "You have until Monday," Pierce said. "The movers are booked for Monday morning. I would encourage you to be ready." "Monday," I said. "Monday." He closed the folder and left it on my table, a gift I had not asked for. Brooke was already walking toward the door, her heels clicking on the floor. Samuel had laid the summer Daniel turned 5. She did not look back at me. Neither of them did. They walked out to a black SUV idling in my driveway next to my rose bushes, and they drove away, and they left me sitting in my own kitchen, believing I was already gone. I stayed in the chair until the sound of the engine faded past the pecan trees at the end of the road. Then I stood up, walked to the front door, and turned the deadbolt. My hands did not begin to shake until I reached the hallway. I want to be honest about that, because I have told this story enough times now to know that people want me to have been calm from the first second, want me to have been the sharp old woman who saw everything coming. I was not calm. My hands shook so badly that I had to press them flat against the wall to make them stop. I passed the photographs that still hung there, Daniel with a missing front tooth, Daniel in a baseball uniform 2 sizes too big, Daniel in a cap and gown squinting into the sun with Samuel's arm around him. I looked at each one and I felt the specific grief of a mother who is realizing that the boy in the pictures and the man in the driveway are no longer the same person, and that she is the only one who still remembers the difference. In the kitchen, the little clock ticked unevenly, one wheel catching against another because I had not finished cleaning it. I stood over it for a long moment. Then I looked at Samuel's photograph on the mantel, and I said the only thing I could think to say. Well, I told him. They locked the greenhouse. I took off my apron and folded it over the back of the chair, the way I always did, the way I would have done on any ordinary evening. Then I went to the bedroom closet, and I moved the stack of quilts, and I dragged out the cedar chest that had been Samuel's grandmother's, and I lifted the lid. Birthday cards from Daniel, 30 years of them. Samuel's wedding ring in a small paper envelope, a locket. His field journals, the leather worn soft at the corners, every page filled with his slanting notes about rootstock and rainfall and the temperament of trees. And underneath all of it, wrapped in a square of dark velvet, a black phone I had not turned on in 4 years. I had put it there the week after Samuel's funeral. I had told myself I would never need it. I had told myself that the life it belonged to was over, that I was just a widow now, an old woman with a greenhouse and a garden, and a son who would call when he could. For 4 years I had let it sit in the dark under my husband's handwriting, and for 4 years I had been proud of not needing it the way you are proud of a scar that has finally stopped hurting. I unwrapped it. I pressed the button. The screen woke blue and cold and asked me for a passcode I had not spoken aloud in a very long time, and my thumb found the numbers on its own. I dialed one number from memory. A woman answered on the second ring, and her voice was crisp and instantly awake, the voice of someone who had been waiting years for exactly this call without knowing it. Mrs. Holloway. Carol, I said, and I heard my own voice change as I said it. Heard the widow drop away and something older and harder come up underneath. Open the Cornerstone file, quietly. There was one beat of silence on the line, just one. Then Carol Whitfield, who had managed the private fortune my husband and I built for 16 years, said the only question that mattered. Who are we hunting? I looked at the folder on my kitchen table at the forged name of a woman I had stopped being 6 years ago, at the boxes stacked against my window by hands that had already measured me for a room in a facility with a clean floor. My son, I said, and his wife. To understand how I ended up sitting in that kitchen, you have to go back 7 weeks to the wedding and to table 23. Not the family table. Not the long table at the front where the parents of the couple sat with their champagne and their good posture. Table 23 near the swinging doors to the kitchen between 2 of Brooke's second cousins who talked past me the entire evening, and an elderly man named Ferris who spent the whole dinner asking me with great courtesy where the restrooms were. He was kinder to me than most of the people at the front table, and I have thought about that since. I had worn a soft blue dress and the pearl earrings Samuel gave me on our 20th anniversary. I had brought a gift wrapped in silver paper, a pendant Samuel had made for me the first spring we were married, a small oval of glass with a pressed sprig of wild aster sealed inside it, the flower we had found growing between the rows of the first orchard we ever planted together. It was not expensive. It was the opposite of expensive. It was a thing a man makes with his hands because he loves you and cannot yet afford anything else. And it had hung around my neck for 40 years because nothing anyone could have bought me was worth more. Brooke accepted it with both hands and a smile so perfect it never once reached her eyes. How vintage, she said. She turned it over as if checking for a hallmark, found none, and set it down on the gift table among the boxes from Tiffany and the envelopes fat with checks. Her mother, Sandra, leaned in to look, made a small sympathetic sound, and murmured, "Sentimental pieces are so sweet." The word sweet in Sandra's mouth meant poor, and we both knew it. Daniel was nearby adjusting his cufflinks. He looked wonderful. That is the thing no one tells you about watching your child become a stranger. He looked wonderful, tall and pressed and glossy, his smile bright and ready for every camera that swung toward him. I remembered him running through my kitchen with his shoes untied and jam on his chin. I remembered Samuel lifting him onto his shoulders in the orchard so he could reach the highest peaches. Both of them laughing, the boy's small hands buried in his father's hair. I remembered sitting up with him through fevers and science fairs and one terrible heartbreak at 19 when he cried into my shoulder, and I thought, this is the softest, truest part of him, and no one will ever get to hurt it. He crossed to my table once during the salad course and kissed my cheek quickly. "Mom, you look nice." "So do you," I said. "You look like your father." Something flickered across his face there and gone. He glanced toward the front table, toward Brooke's people. "Try not to tell the Peaches story tonight, okay? Brooke's family is a little formal." He meant the story about the summer he ate so many off the tree that he was sick behind the packing shed and swore he would never touch another one. A story Samuel used to tell at every holiday until Daniel was old enough to tell it himself. It was until that night one of the ways our family said I love you. "Of course," I said. "Brooke's people." He walked back to them with his easy new smile, and I sat at table 23 with Ferris asking me again where the restrooms were, and I told myself that weddings are stressful and that young men forget things when they are trying to impress a room. The worst of it came near the end of the night when the photographer gathered everyone for the family portraits. Brooke's parents took their places beside the couple. The bridesmaids fussed with the train. Daniel smiled. I stood at the edge of the dance floor with my hands folded, waiting to be called, and the photographer looked around the group and asked, not unkindly, "Do we need one with the groom's mother?" Brooke's smile tightened at the corners. "Maybe later," she said. "We're losing the light outside." Daniel heard her. I watched him hear her. I watched his eyes go to his bride, then to the photographer, then to me, and I watched the calculation happen behind them, quick and quiet, the arithmetic of a man deciding whose disappointment would cost him less. "We'll get one at the brunch tomorrow, Mom," he said. There was no brunch photo. There was no brunch that included me at all. I found out later that the families had gathered at a restaurant downtown, and that no one had thought to mention it, or that someone had thought to mention it and had decided not to. I went home that night with my pendant left behind on the gift table, forgotten among the boxes, and I did not tell anyone, and I did not go back for it. I placed the memory of it in the cedar chest with everything else, and I told myself it did not matter. What I did not let myself say then was that the forgetting had not felt like forgetting. It had felt deliberate. It had felt like a woman practicing on small things the erasures she intended to make on large ones. There was one more moment, and I have never told Daniel about it, and I am not sure I ever will. Late in the evening, I stepped into the ladies' room, and I was inside one of the stalls with my hand on the latch when two of the bridesmaids came in to fix their lipstick, and one of them said, "Is that Daniel's mom, the one in the blue?" And the other one said, "Yeah. Brooke says she's sweet but kind of simple, like old farm simple. Apparently she still clips coupons." And they laughed not cruelly, just carelessly, the way you laugh at something you will never have to think about again. I waited until they left. I washed my hands slowly. I looked at myself in the mirror, at my faded lipstick, at one pearl earring that had gone slightly crooked, and for a few seconds I saw myself the way that room saw me, an aging widow in an off-the-rack dress lost among the orchids and the champagne towers, sweet and simple and finished. And then I remembered Samuel 26 years ago, standing beside me in a conference room with gray carpet and bad coffee, facing 3 men in better suits than his who wanted to buy our company and keep my name off the patents. And I remembered him leaning forward and saying very quietly that his wife's name would be on every filing, or there would be no filing at all. Afterward, in the parking lot, he had taken my hand and said, "Don't ever let them make you small just because they have louder shoes." I straightened my earring. I went back out to table 23. Daniel never knew. That, I think now, was one of my mistakes. I had spent his whole life protecting him from the cost of small cruelties, absorbing them, myself smoothing them over so that he never had to watch his mother be diminished and never had to decide whether to stop it. I thought I was giving him a gentle world. I was giving him permission to look away. 7 weeks later, Brooke stood in my kitchen with a forged deed and a lawyer, and Daniel was somewhere across the county busy being generous with his absence, and the small cruelties I had swallowed my whole life had grown up bold and hungry in the dark. The first thing I did after I hung up with Carol was call my son. He answered on the 5th ring. I could hear an office behind him, phones and keyboards, and the particular hush of people pretending not to listen. "Mom." "Daniel," I said. "Brooke was just here, with a lawyer. She says the house has been transferred and there's a petition to have me declared incompetent." Silence, not confusion. There is a difference, and after 68 years I know it. Confusion asks questions. Silence already has the answers and is deciding which ones to give you. "Mom, please don't start." "Start what?" I said. "Please don't make this into something. You're alone out there. That house is too much for you. The greenhouse, the acreage, the stairs. It's not safe. So you had my signature forged." "Nobody forged anything." He said it too fast, the way he used to deny things at 9 years old, the words tumbling out ahead of the thought. I looked at the folder. I looked at the beautiful, confident signature of the woman I used to be. "Then come out here, Daniel, and sit at your father's table and tell me that to my face." "I can't. I have meetings all afternoon." A pause. "Vanessa's sorry, Brooke. She's handling the logistics. She's better at this than I am. Your wife gave me until Monday to be out of my home. It's not about throwing you out." His voice climbed, and under the defensiveness I heard the thing I had been listening for, the thing that told me the whole story before he did. I heard fear. "It's about building a future. We're starting our real family now, Mom. We need liquidity. We need options. You don't need a whole house and a farm to yourself. You need to be somewhere with people around where someone can keep an eye on you. Real family." The phrase landed exactly where it was aimed, in the soft place under the ribs. I sat down slowly at the table. "Did you sign anything, Daniel?" "Mom, did you sign anything?" "I signed what needed to be signed." A long breath. "I'm trusting Brooke on the details. You should trust me." I closed my eyes, and for one moment he was 6 years old again, standing at the fence on his first day of school, gripping my fingers, looking up at me and saying, "Don't leave until I wave." And I had stood at that fence in the September heat until he turned around at the door and saw me and grinned and waved, and only then had I let myself walk away. "Daniel," I said, "I'm going to ask you one time, and I want you to think before you answer. Are you telling me the truth?" There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. "I'm telling you to trust your son," he said. And then the line went dead. I set the phone down on the table beside the open clock. I did not cry. I have found that crying is for the moments when something can still be saved, and I understood sitting there in the fading light that what could still be saved was not my son's love for me. That was already gone, or had never been what I believed it was. What could still be saved was me. Carol Whitfield worked faster than any human being I have ever known, and she was allergic to comfort. I have employed a great many capable people in my life, and most of them wanted at some point to soften a hard thing before they handed it to me. Carol never did. She had managed the Holloway Trust for 16 years, ever since Samuel and I finalized its structure after the sale, and in all that time she had never once told me that something was going to be all right when it was not. Here is the part the wedding guests did not know, the part Brooke never bothered to learn, the part that turned her clean, simple Mark into the worst mistake of her life. In my 30s, before Daniel, before Samuel's cancer, before the slow narrowing of a widow's days, I was a research scientist. I studied rootstock, the underground half of a fruit tree, the part no one photographs and no one praises, the part that decides whether the tree lives or dies when the rain stops coming. I spent 11 years developing a line of peach and pecan rootstock that could resist the soil-borne diseases that were wiping out orchards across the southeast, and that could hold a tree upright and fed through droughts that were only going to get worse. My employer, a research institute attached to the state, thought of me as a technician. Samuel did not. He was an orchardist. He knew what my work was worth in a way the institute never would, because he stood in the dirt every day and watched trees die that mine would have saved. He pushed me to document everything, to hire our own counsel, to keep private rights when the institute licensed the line out. Everyone thought we were foolish, a farmer and a lab woman spending money we did not have on lawyers to protect dirt research. Nobody wanted. Then the droughts came exactly as I had said they would, and orchards from Georgia to California started replanting on disease-resistant drought-tolerant rootstock, and a great deal of that rootstock traced back through a chain of licenses to a line with my name on it. A national agricultural company bought the rights, and the small company, Samuel and I had built around them, and they paid us for the patents and the plant variety protections and the years of data, and they paid us again every year, in the earnout that kept arriving long after Samuel was gone. The Holloway Agricultural Trust holds $74 million. Daniel did not know. Almost no one knew. We had hidden it, and I want to be clear that we hid it on purpose and for a reason we believed in. Samuel had grown up poor and watched money ruin 2 of his brothers, and I had watched it ruin better people than that, and we agreed before Daniel could even talk that our son would grow up with ordinary birthdays and ordinary chores and ordinary consequences, and that he would learn the shape of his own character before he ever learned the size of his inheritance. So we lived in the same house we always had. I drove the same car for 11 years. I bought the same store brand coffee and clipped the same coupons that made a bridesmaid laugh, and I did not feel poor for a single day of it because I was not poor. I was free. I had built something that outlived droughts, a husband who made me a pendant out of a weed because he loved me, and a son I was raising to be a good man. Daniel mistook all of that for weakness. He looked at the small house and the old car and the coupons, and he decided that his mother was small and that small things can be moved. Carol's first real report came 2 days after my call. Not in an hour, not overnight, because real work does not happen overnight, no matter what people want to believe. She and our trust attorney, a woman named Diane Foster, whose voice could close a door from across a room, spent those 2 days pulling threads, and every thread led somewhere worse. Brooke Sterling was not the heiress she performed. She had worked briefly in luxury branding and then reinvented herself as a wellness entrepreneur, which is to say she had raised money from friends and strangers for a lifestyle company that sold very little and spent a great deal. She had signed personal guarantees on the debt the way desperate people do when they still believe the next quarter will save them. When the market turned, her positions collapsed, and she owed $1.8 million, and she did not owe it to a bank. She owed it to a private lender out of Chicago, a man who operated through shell companies and cash couriers, and who had, in Diane's careful phrasing, a documented history of encouraging repayment. Daniel was tangled in it. He had guaranteed part of the debt after the engagement, believing a story about a temporary liquidity gap that would close after the wedding, after the merger, after the next thing. He had drained his savings. He had borrowed against his company stock. He had opened credit lines in both their names. My son, who had never in his life had to be brave about money, because I had quietly made sure of it, had walked into a burning building because a beautiful woman told him it was only warm. And then the 2 of them had gone looking for water, and they had found my house. And behind my house, they had found the pension I let them see, and behind that they had begun to imagine there might be more. There was more. They had no idea how much more. But they had started on faith to spend a fortune they had only guessed at, and that is the detail that has kept me up on the hard nights since. They did not know about the $74 million. They only suspected the old woman was worth more than she looked. And on that suspicion alone, they had been willing to declare me insane. I read the report twice. Then I opened the second file, the one Carol had flagged with a single word, urgent, and I felt the temperature of my own blood drop. They had not stopped at the house. My public checking account, the ordinary one that held my ordinary pension and my ordinary Social Security, and never much else, had been emptied the same morning Brooke came to my door. $41,000 transferred out under the same forged authority. The house had been deeded to a shell company that traced back through 2 intermediaries to Warren Pierce's own office. The facility Brooke had described as clean had no state inspection on record in over 2 years and was, as far as Diane could determine, barely operating at all. And there was a medical file. A physician I had never met in a practice I had never visited had signed an evaluation stating that I showed signs of progressive cognitive decline, that I was disoriented, resistant to care, prone to falls, and vulnerable to financial exploitation. The irony of that last line took the breath out of me. The document existed to support the guardianship petition, the one that would let a court hand control of my medical decisions, my housing, and in a phrase that appeared 3 times my asset review over to my daughter-in-law. Asset review. They were going to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs so that they could go looking legally for the money they suspected I had hidden. And once they had control, once a judge had signed the order, unwinding it would take years I did not have, and a fight that would happen on their terms in their court, with a paper record that already said I was not to be believed. There was one more thing, and I made myself read it slowly, the way I used to read a measurement I did not want to trust. A life insurance policy, not a new one. I want to be precise about this because for a long time I told the story wrong, and the truth is worse in a quieter way. There was an old policy on my life. A modest one Samuel and I had taken out decades ago and never canceled $300,000, the kind of thing you buy when your child is small and you are afraid of the world. 6 weeks ago, the beneficiary on that policy had been changed. It no longer named Daniel. It named a limited liability company that Diane traced through one more shell to Brooke. They had taken out nothing they could not access. They had simply reached into a 30-year-old promise Samuel and I had made to protect our son, and they had quietly turned it so that it pointed at me instead of for me. It was not a plan to murder me. I have never claimed it was. It was something colder and more bureaucratic than that. It was a plan to make sure that every possible outcome, including the one where an old woman does not survive being uprooted from her home and moved into an unlicensed facility, would pay out to the people who had uprooted her. I pushed the tablet away and stood up and gripped the edge of the sink until the black spots at the edges of my vision cleared. Outside the window, past the locked greenhouse, the pecan trees Samuel had planted the year Daniel was born stood in their long, even rows, indifferent, patient, alive, because of work I had done before either of them existed. It is one thing to be robbed by your child. I could have survived that. I think I could even have forgiven it in time if it had only been the house. It was another thing entirely to learn that they had done the arithmetic on my death and found it acceptable. Carol called that night. "Do you want me to freeze everything?" she said. "Right now. I can have the whole structure locked and a security detail at your door within the hour." "No," I said. "Ruth, not yet. The insurance change moves this into a different category of risk. Let me send Diane and a team. Let me put people around you." I looked down the hall at the photographs at the boy with the missing tooth. "I need to know how much of it he understands," I said. "There's a difference between a man who was lied to and a man who is lying, and I need to know which one my son is before I decide what to do with him." Carol was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler than I had ever heard it, which frightened me more than anything else that day. "You're still his mother," she said. "Yes. That's exactly why you shouldn't be alone in a room with him." I almost smiled. "Carol," I said, "I don't intend to be." There was a file Carol sent me the next morning that I had not asked for and did not expect, and it was the one that undid me briefly before it made me strong. It was the original trust language. The clause Samuel had insisted on adding in the last months when he was thin and cold all the time, and the chemotherapy made his hands shake so badly he could not hold a pen. I remembered that meeting only in pieces because I had wanted so badly for it to be over. Daniel was applying to colleges. Samuel's medication schedule was a spreadsheet I updated 3 times a day. Every legal sentence in that office felt like another way of admitting that time was running out, and I had wanted to sign the papers and go home and pretend for one more evening that we had years. But Samuel had been stubborn to the end. He had made Diane, who was younger then, and already sharp enough to make bankers nervous, read one section aloud twice. It was a coercion and exploitation clause, and it stated that any heir, beneficiary, spouse of an heir, or associate of any of them who attempted to obtain the trust's assets through fraud, undue influence, forged authorization, manipulation of incapacity, elder exploitation, or coerced guardianship, would be permanently and irrevocably disqualified from every benefit, distribution, and protection the trust provided. I had frowned at him across the table. "Samuel, that's extreme. That reads like you're expecting to be robbed." He had looked at me with those tired, steady eyes and said, "Love makes you generous, Ruth. Grief is going to make you soft. I'm not writing this because I distrust Daniel. I'm writing it because I know how people circle money. They circle it like flies circle fruit, and they wait until the fruit is on the ground and can't defend itself. He's our son, and one day he may marry someone who is not our anything." He had reached across the table and taken my hand, the one that had not yet begun to tremble. "Promise me you won't confuse being his mother with lying down for him. Promise me you'll know the difference when it matters." I had promised because he was dying, and I would have promised him the moon. And then he had died, and I had folded the promise away with everything else, and for 4 years I had not needed it. Sitting at my kitchen table in the thin gray light before dawn, reading my dead husband's careful cruelty toward the people who would one day come for me, I finally understood what he had been doing in that office. He had not been suspicious of the world. He had been afraid for me. He had known that the danger to a woman like me would not come from strangers. It would come wearing a face I loved on a day when I was too lonely and too tired to lock the door, and he had built me a way to survive it before he went because he knew he would not be there to stand in the doorway himself. I put my hand flat on the page over his words, the way I used to put my hand flat over his heart in the last weeks to feel it still going, and I said out loud to the empty kitchen, all right, Samuel, I'll know the difference." And I did. I gave myself 2 weeks. Diane went into the probate court and filed for a continuance on the guardianship hearing, and she got it because the petition had been assembled in a hurry by people who assumed no one would ever contest it, and a rushed petition against a woman with good counsel falls apart the moment anyone pushes on it. That bought us time. It also told Brooke and Pierce exactly nothing, because the continuance was filed the way 100 boring continuances are filed every day, and they were too confident to read it as a warning. That was the point. I did not want them warned. I wanted them comfortable. So I began to perform. I dragged empty boxes from the barn into the living room and stacked them by the front window where the neighbors could see. I left the curtains open. I let old Mrs. Dunphy across the road watch me carry armloads of linens back and forth for an afternoon, because I knew she would tell everyone she saw that poor Ruth Holloway was finally packing up, that it was a shame that she had held on out there too long. I called Brooke and left her a voicemail, in a small, trembling voice, thanking her for making the arrangements, telling her I understood now that it was for the best, asking if I might bring a few boxes of Samuel's field journals and some family photographs to her and Daniel's apartment, since the facility only allowed 2 suitcases and I could not bear to put his life's work in storage. She called me back within 20 minutes. I have wondered since whether she heard in that voicemail the sound of a woman finally breaking and whether it pleased her. "Fine," she said, "but make it quick. Daniel's not home and I'm extremely busy." The apartment was downtown 40 minutes away in a glass tower with a lobby that smelled of white lilies and money that was mostly borrowed. I want to say something here about the recording because people ask and because Diane made me learn the rule until I could recite it. In this state, a conversation may be recorded lawfully by any one party to it. I was going to be a party to every word I recorded. I did not plant a device in someone else's home. I did not hide a microphone in a room I then left. I clipped a small recorder inside my cardigan and I carried it into a conversation I intended to have in a place I had been invited, and everything I captured was captured by a woman standing right there taking part in it. Diane checked it 3 times. It was clean. Brooke opened the door in a silk robe and an expression of pure inconvenience. "Put them by the wall," she said. "Don't scratch the floor." I bent under the first box, letting my breath come heavy, letting my movements go slow and careful and old. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, and I watched the word sweetheart land on her like a slap she was too proud to flinch from. The apartment was beautiful, the way a hotel lobby is beautiful, expensive and cold and untouched by any life that had actually been lived in it. Wedding gifts sat stacked and unopened by a bar cart. A stack of overdue notices peeked out from under a magazine on the counter, and I let my eyes pass over them without stopping, the way you pass over something you are not supposed to have seen. Brooke's tablet lay on the kitchen island, its screen still lit with a wire transfer page numbers, with a great many zeros that I did not let myself read too closely. "Will Daniel be home soon?" I asked. "No. I'd hoped to speak with him." "You already did. He agrees with me." She leaned against the island and folded her arms. "Honestly, Ruth, this is exactly the kind of thing the placement will help with. The confusion. You keep circling back to things that have already been decided." I set the box down and straightened up slowly, one hand on my lower back. "Did he agree to the insurance too?" I asked. "The change to the beneficiary." She went still. It was brief. If I had not spent 30 years watching for the exact moment a stable reading goes wrong, I might have missed it. But I did not miss it. Her face held itself very carefully for half a second too long, and in that half second I had everything I needed to know that she knew precisely what I was talking about. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "The policy Samuel and I took out when Daniel was small. Someone changed who it pays to 6 weeks ago. Someone who wasn't me." "You're confused." "Am I?" I let my voice stay soft, almost pleading, because a frightened old woman gets more truth than a sharp one. "My doctor retired 3 years ago, Brooke. The physician who signed that evaluation, the one that says I'm losing my mind, I've never met him. He's never examined me. How would he know anything about my mind?" Her eyes sharpened, and I watched her decide that the safest thing was to be cruel, because cruelty had always worked for her before. She crossed to the island and picked up her phone. "This is what I'm talking about," she said. "You invent things. You've decided there's some conspiracy because you can't accept that your son wants a life that doesn't revolve around visiting you. Is the facility even licensed?" "Of course it's licensed." "Will he visit me there?" She laughed one short, cold sound. "Daniel can barely look at you without feeling guilty. You think he wants to spend his Sundays in some depressing home listening to you tell stories about everything you gave up for him. He wants to be free of that Ruth. We both do. You dislike me that much, I said quietly. She stepped closer and the mask slipped just enough. I dislike what you are, she said. A small house, a small life. A man raised to feel guilty every time he reaches for something bigger than a peach orchard. You had your turn. You made your choices. Now it's ours. By selling my home out from under me. By using assets that are just sitting there doing nothing. And if I died, I said in that clean, quiet facility with the beneficiary changed. What then? She smiled, and it was the smile from the wedding, the one that never reached her eyes, and she said, then at least everyone could stop pretending this is temporary. There it was, not a confession to a murder, because there was no murder planned, and I have always been careful to say so. But there was malice in it, and motive, and the specific ugly shape of a person who had considered my death as one branch of a decision tree and found it tolerable. On the recording in her own voice in her own kitchen with me standing right there. I lowered my eyes as if she had beaten me. I should go, I said. Yes, she said, you should. And that was when the door opened and Daniel walked in. He stopped just inside the doorway with his briefcase in his hand, and he saw me, and for one full second his face broke completely open. Everything was in it. The boy at the fence, the shame, the love he had spent 7 weeks pretending was gone. It was all still there, and my heart did the terrible thing hearts do, which is hope. Then Brooke crossed the room and put her hand on his arm, and I watched the man he had chosen to become close over the boy, like water over a stone. She brought some boxes, Brooke said. She's just leaving. I looked at my son. Daniel, I said, I'm standing right here. If you tell me the truth right now, the whole truth, I will listen to every word of it. I won't be angry. I'll just listen. To you. His throat moved. Brooke's fingers tightened on his sleeve, a small white pressure I do not think he even felt. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running. Go home, Mom, he said, looking at a point on the floor beside my feet. We'll see you Monday. Something inside me that had been holding a door open for 7 weeks let go of the handle and stepped back and let the door swing shut. I nodded once. I did not argue. I walked to the elevator and I pressed the button, and when the doors closed, I put one hand over my mouth. Not to stop tears, but to hold in a sound that was trying to climb up out of my chest and that I did not want the security camera to see. When I reached the lobby, a black sedan was waiting at the curb, and Carol was standing beside it with the door already open. She did not ask if I was all right. She looked at my face, and she knew that I was not, and that I was not going to be for a long time, and that neither of those things could be helped now. She simply held the door. We have enough, she said. I got in. I looked out the window at the glass tower with my son somewhere inside it. Then finish it, I said. But Carol, give him one more chance first. I have to be able to say I gave him one more chance. That Saturday evening I made one last call, and it was not to Brooke. Daniel did not answer. I had not expected him to. So I left a message, and I chose every word because I knew even then that it would be the last thing I ever said to him, as only his mother, before all the lawyers and the courts and the record made it impossible to be only that again. Daniel, this is your mother. I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling to give you one clean chance because I promised your father a long time ago that I would know the difference between loving you and lying down for you, and this is me trying to know it. If you call me back before Monday morning and tell me the truth, all of it, I will listen to you as your mother, and I will still be hurt, and I will still need answers, but I will listen with a mother's ears. If you don't call me back, I'm going to understand that you chose the paperwork over me, and I'm going to act accordingly, and it is going to be too late after that. I want to give you the chance to make it not be too late. I paused. There were 100 other things I wanted to say. Do you remember your father teaching you to ride a bike in the packing shed lot? Do you remember sleeping on the floor beside my bed during thunderstorms until you were nearly 10 and swore me to secrecy? Do you remember telling me you'd buy me a mansion someday, and I told you I only wanted you to grow up kind? Instead, I said, I love you. That's the whole reason I'm asking. I love you, and I am asking you for the truth. Then I ended the call, and I set the phone down, and I waited. Carol's people confirmed the rest later from records that were lawfully obtained through the investigation, and I have read the timeline more times than is good for me. He listened to the message at 6:38 on Saturday evening. He listened to it once. Then he listened to it again. And then he deleted it. 4 minutes later at 6:42, he sent a text message to Warren Pierce. It said we proceed Monday. She's emotional, but she'll be compliant. That is the one document I have never been able to read more than once. Everything else I can look at with the flat, clean eye I trained over 30 years. That one I have only ever managed to look at a single time, and then I have had to put it away. Monday morning came up bright and clear and cruel, the kind of blue autumn sky that has no business over a day like that. At 7:42, a moving truck pulled up in front of my house, and two men in gray shirts climbed out and began lowering the ramp. At 7:51, Warren Pierce arrived in a silver sedan, his briefcase in his hand, his face arranged into the mild professional annoyance of a man who had done this in other kitchens and expected no trouble here. At 7:58, Daniel and Brooke pulled in behind him. I watched all of it from the bedroom window from behind the curtain, the way old Mrs. Dunphy had watched me pretend to pack. Daniel was pale. He wore a dark suit and no wedding ring, and I noticed the ring and I did not know what it meant, and I made myself stop wondering. Brooke wore black trousers and a white blouse and her sunglasses again against the shade, and she was talking quickly to Pierce and stabbing one finger toward my front door. They expected boxes. They expected an old woman standing in her kitchen with red eyes begging for one more day. They had come to collect a defeat they were sure was already theirs. I stepped back from the window and I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a tailored black suit, the one Samuel bought me the year I was given an award by a National Agricultural Society. An award Daniel had been too young to understand and too busy later to remember. My silver hair was swept back, and around my neck against the black hung the glass pendant with the wild aster sealed inside it, the one Brooke had left behind on the gift table at the wedding. Diane had recovered it quietly in the course of everything else. I did not wear it as a plea. I wore it as evidence. In the living room, Carol Whitfield sat on the sofa with a tablet balanced on her knees. Beside her sat Diane Foster compact and still with a stack of folders squared off on the coffee table in front of her, like bricks in a wall. Two investigators from the district attorney's Elder Financial Fraud Unit stood near the hallway, and with them was a woman named Detective Laura Bennett, who had a kind face and the flattest, steadiest eyes I have ever seen on a human being. A uniformed sheriff's deputy waited by the kitchen door. On the coffee table, arranged in the order Diane and I had chosen the night before, lay everything. The forged power of attorney, with the confident signature of a woman who had died in me 6 years ago. The fabricated medical evaluation signed by a physician I had never met. The guardianship petition. The record of the $41,000 pulled from my account. The reverse mortgage paperwork they had drawn up against the equity. The changed insurance beneficiary. The deed to the shell company that led back to Pierce's office. The transcript of Brooke's kitchen. And in its own folder alone, the record showing that at 6:38 on Saturday, my son had listened to his mother ask for the truth and had deleted the question and had chosen the paperwork 4 minutes later. At 8 o'clock exactly, a key scraped in my front lock. Daniel had kept his key. Of course he had. I had given it to him myself years ago so he could always come home. The door opened. He stepped inside first. "Mom," he said, already talking, already managing me. "Let's just make this easy, okay? The movers are on the clock and there's no reason to." Then he saw the room. I watched the words die in his mouth. I watched him take in the sofa, the folders, the strangers, the badge on the deputy's belt, the black suit, the pendant. Brooke came in behind him and stopped so suddenly that Pierce nearly walked into her back. And for a moment the three of them stood clustered in my doorway like people who had opened the wrong door in a dream. I was sitting in Samuel's old chair by the window, my hands folded in my lap, and I let them look at me for a moment before I spoke. "Good morning," I said. "Since the three of you were so eager to handle our family's business through paperwork, I thought we might all sit down with the paperwork together." Brooke recovered first. She always did. "What is this?" she said. "Sit down, Brooke." "What is this?" Pierce's eyes were moving over the room, and I watched him do the arithmetic that his clients were too panicked to do. He saw Diane, and something in his face changed, because lawyers in this county know Diane Foster the way small animals know the shape of a hawk. He saw the investigators. He saw the deputy. The mild annoyance drained out of his face and left it gray. "Mrs. Holloway," he said very carefully, "I would advise everyone not to escalate this." Diane stood up. She did not raise her voice. She never does. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "I would advise you to stop talking before you add obstruction to the list. Sit down, all of you. You'll want to hear this sitting down." Brooke ripped off her sunglasses. "Daniel," she said, "do something." But Daniel was not doing anything. Daniel was standing very still in the middle of my living room with his eyes fixed on the folders on the coffee table. and I could see him reading the labels, and I could see the exact moment he understood what each one was. Detective Bennett stepped forward with a folder of her own. "For the record," she said in a voice as flat and level as a table, "my office has been reviewing this matter for 2 weeks. We have sufficient evidence to open charges related to financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery of a power of attorney filing a fraudulent instrument affecting real property, unauthorized withdrawal from a protected account, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. We are separately reviewing the conduct of the notary who attested to the power of attorney. His name is Kevin Ross. He works out of Mr. Pierce's office." Pierce sat down. He sat down the way a man sits down when his legs have stopped consulting him. Brooke did not sit down. Brooke laughed high and thin and disbelieving and pointed at me. "This is absurd. Look at her. She is not some helpless victim. She set this whole thing up. She has been lying to all of us. She is manipulating you." I stood up out of Samuel's chair. The room changed when I did. I have thought about why. I am not tall. I am not young. My hands carry their age spots and the faint permanent curl of the arthritis that gave me away. But the woman who stood up in that living room was not the sweet, simple widow they had measured for a small, clean room, and everyone in the house felt the difference, including, I think, Brooke, who took one step backward before she caught herself. "No," I said. "I did not set the trap. You set the trap. You built it very carefully over months with lawyers and notaries and a doctor who never met me. I simply declined to die in it." "You lied about being poor," Brooke said, and her voice cracked on the word poor, and I understood that this of everything was the betrayal she actually felt, the discovery that the small woman she had been robbing had been worth robbing all along. "I never once said I was poor," I said. "You looked at my house and my car and my coupons and you decided I was because it was more convenient to rob a poor woman than to respect a careful one. I lived like myself, Brooke. That is not a crime and it is not a symptom whatever your rented doctor wrote down." Daniel spoke for the first time since he had walked in. "What does she mean?" he said. His voice was very small. "Mom, what does she mean lied about being poor?" Carol turned the tablet around so that the screen faced him. I had told her which page to leave it on. It was the summary page of the Holloway Agricultural Trust, the current valuation printed clean at the top. The number I had kept from my son his whole life so that he could become a man before he became an heir. $74 million. Daniel looked at it. His lips parted and no sound came out. Brooke crossed the room in 3 steps and stared at the screen, and I watched her face do something I have never seen another human face do, which was to grieve and calculate at the same time, to mourn the safety she had thrown away, and to begin even in that instant, even with a detective standing 8 feet away, to imagine how the number might still be reached. "That is not possible," she whispered. "My work was quiet," I said. "It was underground, literally. Rootstock. The part of the tree nobody photographs. It was never imaginary." Daniel looked as though he might be sick. "Mom," he said, "you had this, the whole time, when I was in school, when I had the loans." "Yes." "When Dad was sick." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" And his voice broke on it, and for one moment I could not tell, and this is the thing that has grieved me most in all of it. I could not tell whether the break in his voice was sorrow or shame, or the sound of a man realizing the size of what he had almost gotten away from. I had known that voice for 36 years, and I could no longer read it, and a mother who can no longer read her son's voice has already lost something that no verdict gives back. "Because I wanted you to become a man before you became an heir," I said. "Because your father and I watched money hollow out good people, and we decided you would grow up knowing the shape of your own character first. You were never hungry. You were never cold. You were never for one single day of your life unloved. The only thing you ever lacked was unlimited access to money you had not earned, and I gave you that lack on purpose, and I would do it again. You let me struggle," he said. "I let you work." My voice did not shake. I had wondered whether it would, and it did not. "And when the struggle was more than a young man should carry, I carried the part you couldn't see. The medical bills from your accident at 22. The deposit on your first apartment, which came to you through what you thought was a scholarship. The loans you never knew were paid. I helped you your whole life, Daniel. I just never let the helping become who you were, because I have watched what it does to a person, to be owned by the people who pay for him, and I loved you too much to do that to you." Brooke's head came up. "There was more," she said, "and it was not a question, it was hunger. You paid for things, too. There's more than just the—" I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on my son. "You could have told me." Daniel said again quietly. You could have become someone I could tell, I said, and I watched it go into him and land, and I was not sorry, and I am still not sorry, and I have made my peace with not being sorry. The room was silent, and then Diane Foster reached into the last folder, the one she had kept apart from the others, and she laid a single document on the coffee table, and she said, there is one more matter that the family should understand before anyone decides how to proceed. Brooke's eyes went to it. What guardianship filing, she said before she had even read it, and I understood from the reflex of it that guardianship was the word she was most afraid to hear, and I understood something else too, something that made the whole terrible morning tilt. Not the guardianship, Diane said, though we'll come to that. This is the trust's coercion and exploitation clause. She read it aloud in her closing door voice, the exact language Samuel had made her read twice in a lawyer's office while the chemotherapy made him cold in July. Any heir beneficiary spouse of an heir or associate who attempts to obtain the trust's assets through fraud, undue influence, forged authorization, manipulation of incapacity, elder exploitation, or coerced guardianship is permanently and irrevocably disqualified from all benefits, distributions, and protections of the trust. She set the page down. Mr. Holloway, she said to my son, as of this morning on the strength of the evidence, Detective Bennett described you have been removed from the trust. All benefits, all distributions, all emergency access provisions, all family asset protections, permanently. There is no appeal built into the instrument because the man who wrote it did not want there to be one. Daniel sat down on the edge of the armchair, as if his legs had finally stopped arguing with him too. No, Brooke said, no, that is not. It was signed and witnessed before your husband was born into this family, Mrs. Holloway, Diane said to her without warmth. It has been sitting in the trust for 4 years waiting. You didn't trip a new alarm. You walked into one your father-in-law said a long time before he ever heard your name. And here is where the last thing happened, the thing I had not planned and could not have planned, the thing that told me their whole alliance had been a house built on a fault line. Daniel lifted his head and looked at Brooke, and he said, You told me the medical paperwork was just for the placement. You told me it was so the facility could admit her. You never said anything about a full guardianship. You never said anything about her assets. Brooke's jaw worked. It was all connected, Daniel. You said we were protecting ourselves. We were. Her composure was gone now, cracked all the way through, and what came out from behind it was not a mastermind, and was not a villain from a story. It was just a frightened woman who had run out of road. We were protecting ourselves from being poor, from that man in Chicago, from being trapped in a life we couldn't afford, from her sitting out here on $74 million while we drowned. That money should have been yours. It should have been ours. She had no right to sit on it while your family went under. You changed my mother's life insurance, Daniel said, and his voice was rising now, horror breaking through the shock. That's what she meant. In the apartment. You changed who it pays to. Because you were useless, Brooke said, and it came out of her like something tearing. Every single time your mother so much as looked sad, you folded. I couldn't build any of this if I had to wait for you to stop feeling guilty. So I stopped telling you the parts you couldn't handle. Yes, I did. Somebody had to. The sentence took whatever was left of my son's face and finished it. Because it was true, and he heard that it was true, and worse than her betrayal of him was the thing her betrayal exposed, which was that he had wanted not to know. He had built a wall between himself and the details precisely so that he could tell himself later that he had not really understood. She had just told a detective and 2 investigators and his mother that the wall had been deliberate, and that she had built it for him because he asked her to without asking. Detective Bennett nodded to the investigators. What happened after that happened quickly and without drama, the way these things actually do, nothing like the way I had imagined them in the long nights when I lay awake rehearsing this exact morning. Pierce began to say something about representation and about his client's rights, and failed to finish any of it, because there is nothing a lawyer can say in that moment that does not make it worse. Brooke said something about lawsuits and about her reputation, and about how none of us understood the pressure she had been under, and no one in the room acknowledged a word of it. And Daniel simply stood up when the deputy asked him to, and turned around and put his hands where he was told to put them, and cried without any sound at all, while his rights were read to him in my living room, under the photographs of himself in the hallway, the missing tooth, the too big uniform, the graduation cap, and Samuel's arm. I did not look away. I had decided beforehand that I would not, that I owed myself that much, that I had looked away from small cruelties his whole life, and I would not look away from this one large true thing. So I watched. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have buried a husband. When they walked, Brooke passed me toward the door. She stopped. "You rind us," she said. I put my hand up and touched the pendant at my throat, the wild aster Samuel had sealed in glass in the first spring of our marriage, the flower we found growing wild between the rows of a young orchard that no longer belonged to anyone we knew. "No," I said. "I survived you. There's a difference. Your husband is only just learning it." And then they were gone, and my house was very quiet. Carol sent the movers away. Diane stayed to begin the emergency filings that would unwind the forged deed and restore the house to my name, work that would take months and that she performed with the same flat competence she brought to everything. Detective Bennett took my statement at the kitchen table beside the little clock I still had not finished cleaning, and then she gathered her folders and paused at the door and said the only personal thing she said all day, which was, "For what it's worth. Mrs. Holloway, most of the ones we see never get to the truth in time. You did. Hold on to that." And then she left too, and the neighbors watched from behind their curtains, whispering into phones, and by evening old Mrs. Dunphy would have the whole county believing 6 different versions of what had happened at the Holloway place. I walked down the hall to Daniel's old room. It had become a storage room years ago, but a few things had survived the sorting the way a few things always do. A baseball trophy gone dull. A model airplane he had built with Samuel, one winter, one wing repaired with a child's clumsy tape. And a framed photograph of Daniel at 8 years old up on his father's shoulders in the orchard, both of them laughing into a sun that had set for good a long time ago. I picked up the photograph, and for the first time all day with everyone gone and no one left to be strong in front of, I cried. Not the careful held-in sound from the elevator. The other kind. The kind that has been waiting 7 weeks, or maybe 4 years, or maybe 36. Carol found me there 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway and did not come in. "I thought I raised him better than this," he said. "You raised a child," she said. "You gave him everything a child needs to become a good man. You stood at every fence until he waved. He chose what kind of man to become on his own as a grown man with his own hands and his own will. Those are 2 different things. Ruth and you are only responsible for the first one. You do not get to take the blame for the second, no matter how much it would comfort you to." I held the frame against my chest. That is the hardest truth I know about being a mother, and I have had a long time to look at it now. You can teach and feed and protect and love and sacrifice and stay awake through every fever and stand at every fence until the child waves, and you can still one bright, cruel Monday find yourself standing across a room from a stranger wearing your son's face. And the love does not stop. That is the part people get wrong when they hear this story. It did not stop. It simply stopped being in charge. 2 months later, I sold the house properly, this time of my own free will, with my own true trembling signature on the papers, the one with the little stutter in it that no forger had bothered to learn. I sold it because I no longer wanted to live inside a place that had been turned into a crime scene wearing the mask of a home. Before I left, I finished cleaning the mantel clock. I polished the brass wheels and reset the pendulum and adjusted the escapement until the ticking came. Even and steady, the way it was meant to sound, the way it had sounded on ordinary evenings when Samuel was alive and Daniel was small, and none of us knew anything about what people will do to reach money that is only sitting there doing nothing. And I went into the greenhouse, which was mine again, and I harvested the last generation of the heirloom seeds I had been keeping alive for 11 years, the ones descended from a packet Samuel's grandmother had pressed into my hand at our wedding, and I dried them and folded them into paper envelopes and packed them in the tin that had held them for 3 generations. I put the tin in a box with Samuel's field journals and his photograph and the wild aster pendant, and I did not throw away Daniel's birthday cards, 30 years of them, because people expect anger to erase love, and it does not. The love stays. It just no longer runs the house. With Carol and Diane, I built something. We called it the Samuel and Ruth Holloway Elder Justice Fund, and it exists to provide legal defense for older people who are being robbed by the very families and caretakers and advisors who are supposed to protect them. The first grant went to an 82-year-old woman whose nephew had emptied her savings through a fake home repair contract. The second went to a retired schoolteacher whose daughter had tried to force a guardianship after learning about a small inheritance. I read every application myself, not because I enjoy the pain of them, because silence very nearly finished me, and I have money now more than I will ever spend, and I have decided to make silence expensive for the people who count on it. Daniel wrote to me from the county jail, and later from the place he was sent after. The first letter blamed Brooke, and I did not answer it. The second letter blamed his fear, and I did not answer that one either. The third letter was very short. It said, "Mom, I knew enough to stop. I didn't stop. That's the whole thing, isn't it?" I read that one twice. Then I folded it and put it in the box next to an old Mother's Day card he had made me in the 3rd grade, the one with the crooked construction paper flower and the words "Best Mom" spelled with the S facing the wrong way. Maybe someday he will become honest enough to deserve a conversation. Maybe he already is, and I am not yet brave enough to have it. Forgiveness, I have learned, is not a key you hand to the person who burned your house down. Sometimes forgiveness is only the decision to stop spending the rest of your life standing in the smoke. At the opening of the fund, I gave a short speech because I am not a woman who gives long ones. I stood behind a plain wooden podium in a plain room full of lawyers and social workers, and old people who had come because they had nowhere else to bring their shame, and I wore the black suit and the pendant, and I said, "I used to think that being robbed began when someone took your money. I was wrong. It begins earlier than that. It begins the day someone teaches you to doubt your own right to say no. If you are old, you still have the right to your home. If you are lonely, you still have the right to your own name at the bottom of a page. If you are a parent, you still have the right to your dignity, and love has never once required you to hand someone the knife and hold still." In the back row, Carol wiped her eyes and pretended she had not, and I saw her, and I kept going. This fund is for everyone who was ever called difficult when they were only refusing to disappear. That is the line that made the evening news. But the line I have kept is one nobody reported spoken to me afterward by a woman of about 80 who took both my hands in hers and said very quietly, "All this time I thought I was the only fool." And I held her fingers and told her the truest thing I know, that she was never a fool, that loving someone who used it against her is not the same as being one, and that the two get confused only because the people who rob us need us to confuse them. I live now in a small apartment that looks out over a shared garden smaller than the house, and it does not need to be bigger. There are no forged papers on the porch. There are no boxes stacked against the window by hands that measured me while I slept. On the mantel stands Samuel's photograph in the blue work shirt, and beside it, the wild aster pendant. And beside that, a newer picture, one Carol took without telling me, of an old woman in a black suit, cutting a ribbon in the sun, her silver hair bright, her shoulders straight, her eyes perfectly clear. I look at that woman sometimes for a long while. For most of my life, I believed that being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left to protect, and I know better now. A mother can love her child and still say no. A mother can grieve the person her child became and still refuse to be his victim. A mother can carry the memory of the boy at the fence without carrying the guilt for the man in the doorway, because that guilt was never hers to carry. They thought my age made me disposable. They thought my loneliness made me easy. They thought a forged signature could quietly move an old woman out of the way of the life they wanted. They did not find a helpless widow in that little house at the end of the pecan road. They found the woman who built the rootstock and buried the husband and raised the son, and noticed in a single glance that her own name had been signed too well. And in the greenhouse on the tin of seeds 3 generations old, my grandmother-in-law's handwriting still reads what it has always read, faded now but perfectly clear. Not every seed comes up, but you still choose what you plant. Tonight I made tea, and I opened the window over the garden, and I pressed one seed from the old tin into a new pot of soil, the way I have every autumn of my adult life, first in the orchard with Samuel, and then alone in the greenhouse, and now here in a clay pot on a windowsill in a city that does not know my name. It is a small thing to plant a seed. It is the smallest act I know, and it is also the one that has taught me the most, because a seed asks nothing of you except patience and honesty, and it will not come up for a lie. I sat down to listen to the little clock tick, even and steady on the shelf where I keep it now, the brass wheels turning cleanly at last, and I thought about all the years I mistook silence for peace and disappearing for grace. For the first time in a very long while, the sound of the clock did not remind me of time I had lost, or of a husband in the ground, or of a boy at a fence who grew into a man in a doorway. It reminded me of time that is still, and finally and entirely my own, and of a promise I made in a lawyer's office to a dying man that I would know the difference when it mattered. I knew it. I know it still.